Hey guys, what's going on? Carter here. We are going to talk about Strider lock geometry in this video. We're going to compare the two geometries, and I'm going to talk about why I'm kind of almost preferring the old lock geometry, just purely from a utilitarian standpoint. Sorry if things look a little dark. This white paper throws off my color contrast. But here we have old lockup, new lockup. Comparison wise, I'm going to use the SMF just because it's far more pronounced. In fact, a lot of people aren't even able to tell the difference on many SNGs because it's, a smaller area, so you can't catch that radius. Probably easiest to hold this over the white. So you can see that lock face, which is right here. See how it's straight across? There's no curve to it. It's just at a perfectly straight angle. Whereas if you look at this one, see how it's curved? It's got a little curve to it. And what the complaint is with this lockup is once your lock bar kind of maxes out on moving over and enough surface wears off, it can start to rock. Or once it hits this steep angle, it can start to slip down to the flatter area. Whereas this, because it's a straight angle, isn't really going to happen. But let me, and some people look at Strider's old lockup as just a complete fail, like a miss on their design. But I don't believe that's the case at all. I think they chose that kind of lockup for a specific reason, and they only moved away from it when they felt like they could provide this style of lockup safely, as safe as their original. And when I talk about safety, what I'm talking about is not lock rock or slipping. I'm talking about the lock actually failing. So if we got the tangs here, if I can draw a straight freaking line. So there's old, and here is, this one's going to be the hardest. Okay, that one's a little wider, but you get the idea. Okay, so there's new, and there's old. Now, like I mentioned before, so the idea is that this one here, when you have your lock bar making contact with it, it's going to have a nice even keel as it wears in and goes all the way up. And this angle should be flat enough, I don't know the technical term, sorry guys, that it's not going to cause it to slip, but angled enough that it provides enough room for wear until it gets all the way to the end. Whereas this one here, the lock bar basically sits about flat till it gets about here. And then we have this steep angle. So what you get is you'll get the Strider, let's say the lock bar is like that, this lock bar is like that. You'll get this Strider, and it'll seem like it's worn in a lot farther because this is kind of almost completely flat right here, and it doesn't actually hit an angle until about halfway through this tang. And then once it does, it's a much steeper angle than this. So at first it's fine, it's pretty gradual right here, but once it wears to about here, what you'll often find is either the tension won't be strong enough to keep pushing it over, in which case you'll get rattle, where there's a gap, because it'll wear this surface down about here, and you'll have a little bit of space right here, and you'll get rattle. To fix that, you can just put more tension in the lock bar to push it over. But the other issue is, because this angle is so steep, eventually, when you put negative pressure on the blade, it's going to want to push it this way. Easy to illustrate that, just take your hands, push down on this hand. The steeper the angle you go, the easier it's going to be to slide past. If you do it flat, obviously it's not going to slide at all. The more you angle it, the easier it is to cause that to slip. Same principle. Steeper this angle, the easier it's going to be for that force to make this slip. And you may say, well, I don't want this. I want something like this. And that's all well and good. But the problem is if you don't do this perfect, you run into a potentially catastrophic issue. This one, if you don't do it perfect, you may get lock rock or rattle or slip a little early, but you're not going to have a catastrophic issue. And what I mean is, on this, if this is angled a little too much, now let's make it even more pronounced, you run the risk of running into slippage, just like this one. But on this one, when it slips, it only slips till it hits this flat area. And then it's flat on flat. This is solid. This, I mean, solid in terms of will not fail. This may rattle, you know, it may make a noise, be annoying, but it's not going to fail because you've got a flat surface on a flat surface. This one, if this slips, it can potentially slip all the way off completely. And then you have a completely failed lock that's going to slip on you. You know, and like I said, if they can do it, I mean, even this technically has the potential to do that because it's all angled. Given enough force, you could, in theory, make this lock bar slip all the way off. Whereas this one, because it has this flat portion, because the curve actually is kind of like that. You know, well, that's a little more. So you've got, like, this section here is basically all flat. And then you hit the actual curve, a steeper curve. So this is kind of like a fail-safe area. No matter how, you know, if this slips, if your lock bar is over here and it slips, it'll hit here and it'll catch and it'll stay put. If you have an angle, if you have a lock bar like this, if it were to slip, it could potentially come completely off and the blade will close on you. And that's kind of the problem I ran into my 0550. It has an angled tang like this, and the lock bar tension is very light. The way they cut that out, it's a very light lock bar tension, so there's not a ton of force pushing that lock bar over. So it didn't take much to cause it to slip off the lock bar. Some of that I think was due to break-in. It is holding pretty solid right now. I'm still pretty confident that if I really pried on it, I would make it slip. But it holds kind of what you'd expect a knife to hold now. But the first time I tried it, because I wasn't really preparing for it to slip, you know, I was just like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, test the lockup. Slipped, and it nailed me right here. That was about 3 or 4 days ago, so got me fairly good. I think this one here on my thumb is from another similar thing. You'd think I'd learn my lesson, right? No, actually, no. This one was from my Tough. That's one. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's when I went to close it, and it kind of stuck, and then I flipped the blade down, and it smacked my thumb. So, I think there's definite validity to a radius lock bar. And what it comes down to is, do you prefer, you know, what are you looking at? I mean, are you really concerned about the lock failing? I mean, are you worried that the type of use you're going to put on there, that, you know, your number one priority is to make sure that does not come unlocked? Or is your main priority just that you don't like that annoying rattle and you would like to prolong until that occurs? Because with this, I mean, this lock bar can wear all the way over before you have any sort of rattle. Whereas this one, you could get rattled, you know, potentially somewhere around here. It could start happening. I mean, just depending on the individual knife. The radius one, you could see some rattle quite a bit sooner than this radius lock bar. And, you know, no matter how this is cut, because there is no flat spot, there is no kind of safety zone. You know, if it's done really, really well, you know, great. But, you know, making knives is complicated. There's a lot of different factors: lock bar tension, this angle, all kinds of things that'll determine how easy it is for this to possibly slip off. So I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards, I don't care about rattle, you know, so much. Especially with Strider, send it in, they'll fix it. I kind of like the idea of having kind of this flat-on-flat safety zone where even if it does slip, it'll catch, as opposed to something like this slipping and potentially, operative word, potentially completely sliding off of there. It's kind of hard to see because you just see like the radius and you don't really realize. But if you look inward, you can see how, let's see, about right here, this is more or less flat, very slight angle right there. You know, it is not going to slip off of this part. Over here, that's a different story. Once it wears in over here, you could have it slip down to here. You could get some blade rattle and things like that. But you do kind of have this little safety area right there. Whereas on this, it's just a straight angle, so there is no flat spot. This one here is done really, really well. You know, nice soft angle on there. It's not too extreme. I'm not too worried about it. But man, all it takes is just a half a degree more angle, and who knows? You know, you could potentially have a problem. And when you're dealing with steel and machinery and things, it's hard to get consistent angles like that, especially if you're not hand finishing it. You know. All right, guys. So that's it. Just wanted to talk lock bars for a minute. Hopefully, I enlightened a few people. Possibly, maybe I pissed a few people off, or maybe some people can give me some comments on things I missed or got wrong, and all that good stuff. All right, guys, take it easy.